Hi, beautiful ones. My intention with the Shamangelic Healing podcast is to be a platform that explores real-life issues and provides you with valuable insights and practical tools to support you on your journey of healing core wounds and reclaiming your power and manifesting a thriving, impactful life that you absolutely love. You see, it's my dream to inspire millions to shine. So if you find these topics valuable, please take a moment and share the podcast and leave us a rave review. This helps the podcast grow and reach the people that would greatly benefit from these insights. Thank you so much for tuning in and investing in your personal development. I'm right here walking this journey with you. So let's dive into this episode. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Shamangelic Healing podcast. Today, we're going to dive into awakening the sacred masculine and really how men can be supported on this journey of awakening the masculine within in a healthy, conscious, sacred way. And also for the women watching and listening, how we can support the men in our life with that journey so that we can be in this supportive place and not get in the way or make it worse, but support our brothers on the journey. And while I'm remembering, we have a free gift for everybody, men and women watching or listening, a free guided visualization on awakening the masculine within. My guest today is a beautiful soul brother, and this is Stefanos Sifandos, and he is really walking, I feel, in the sacred masculine and being a leader. He is an advocate for the sacred masculine and helping the brothers wake up and heal with very specific tools to support their journey, and also with women as well, how to be more in conscious relationship. And I really feel that you are walking it, and I'm grateful to have you really bringing us your medicine and your wisdom as you've helped thousands through this process and continue to do so. Your IGTV, I love listening and watching your IGTV. You're so prolific in the messages and the wisdom that you bring, and so grateful to have you here to help us with how we can be more conscious on this journey. So welcome, Steph.
It's a very kind introduction. I really, I'm very grateful to be here. I've been excited about this for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah. And you just got back from a journey of just kind of dropping into your own truth. Can you share us a little bit about that?
Yes, I returned a week ago from being 10 days in the mountains in Northern California, near Yosemite, near the lower 48 there. I've been about 8,500 feet altitude and just sort of alpine desert, essentially. Yeah. And so part of that was a vision quest. So 10 days away, it wasn't a full 10 days in the vision quest, 4.5, 5 days in the vision quest. So no food, in solitude in the mountains, no tent, just very, very minimal equipment.
Yeah.
Just some water and self, really. That's about it. No books, no audio devices, audio visual, no digital, nothing. So yeah. It was a really, really beautiful time and a very revealing time for me. And also there's been, it's only been a week of being back, and it feels, or more than a week, I should say, 9 days, but it feels as if it was yesterday and also as if it was lifetimes ago. Being in nature, in solitude, in that capacity, although it wasn't a tremendously long time, it wasn't a tremendously physical challenge for me or mental, emotional challenge. It's just the connection that's formed, the depth of connection that's formed. And I'm very connected to nature. I love nature. I love being in nature. I get in nature as often as I can. I'm a beach bum. I love the ocean. Being in the mountains is very special as well. Summer solstice, there was an earthquake, there was a massive thunderstorm. It was a very interesting experience, but a very connected one to nature. And one, there's a sadness there that there's I'm not in the depths of that at the moment. And, being disconnected from the world wasn't a bad thing either. It was a lot of present moment awareness that was able to be cultivated in that space.
And this is part of the rite of passages, or primarily for men, but this can also be for women, is that vision quest of just going in, being in solitude, connecting with Mother Earth, connecting with Great Spirit or God, Creator, Source, your higher self, and just being in the stillness and listening. I've had 2 vision quests, and they've both been so deep, and cultivating a sense of inner listening, as well as a sense of deeper connection with the trust of that relationship to the maternal energy of Mother Earth, and that protective energy of the divine masculine in its spiritual form, and just finding those within, in the stillness and the trust, and so that is that's quite a journey. And that was a part of traditional rites of passage for men, was to go in and listen, because traditionally women were connected in the moon cycles with that deep listening and connected to Mother Earth, through their own moon cycles and their own menstruation and their own sensitivity. And men did that by separating from the community and doing that before they were able to become part of the tribe and actually hunt. And that rite of passage was quite traditional. And so.
Very much so. It was, for females, a distinct rite of passage, as you mentioned, the menstrual cycle and the moon cycle, that really begins to separate that childhood or that girlhood into womanhood, whereas men don't really have that. And so we really need a cultural rites of passage, a very distinct definition of this is who we were, this is who we are, this is who we're becoming. And vision quests were part of that. And the vision quests vary all over the world. The rites of passage vary all over the world. The rites of passage that I took just now was an extension or a variation of a Lakota tradition.
Yeah.
And they all play a role in helping mature us in different ways, helping us see aspects of ourselves that we couldn't see before because of the clutter or the busyness or the fear or the pain. A lot of stuff just comes to the surface when you're on your own. You got a lot of time to think and just be, just sit and connect to self and connect to the immediate environment. And without the need to eat or without the need to really do anything, there's something very special that comes from that level of awareness.
Deep. I remember, just usually, it's not uncommon to sit with an aspect of nature, like a mountain or a tree or a lake or something that you can kind of commune with. And one of mine was with this tree, and I was like, okay, let me connect with this tree. And like after 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, I got it. Next. And it was like, oh no, there'll be 7 more days of this. And so, like it just allows you to go deeper and deeper and deeper with whatever medicine that you're connecting with, or whether elder, whatever nature wisdom teacher is really showing up, whether that's an animal spirit guide, whether that's an element, the weather, or a mountain that is acting as your spiritual teacher at that time. And there can be many, but I remember that going, okay, I got it, now what? And just going, oh, we're so accustomed to dancing in the shallow end around conversations of like, okay, I got it, next. And it's like, no, deeper. So I'd love to ask, from a man's perspective, what are the challenges that, with the programming and the influences in a man's life that will later have to be unraveled? What are the biggest distortions that men experience in their early programming around what it is to be a man and manhood and how to be a successful man? And as you unravel that with the men that you work with, what are the common themes that you find in that process of unraveling?
Well, the common themes are the men feel very isolated. They feel very alone. And I'm not talking about that deliberate self-imposed solitude for deeper self-reflection, but rather that I have no one to go to. No one understands me if I express myself in any particular way, whether it's just verbally, whether I'm intellectually expressing emotions or actually emoting. It's a sign of weakness. Weakness is not acceptable. It deters from being a man. And so that's some of the big issues that men face. And we develop, from an evolutionary perspective, this is very true for me. we develop something called secondary emotions, because being in the wild and being at the forefront of danger for a great part of human history, particularly men being responsible for extending the perimeter, keeping the area safe, hunting, being out, more so out in the wild, carrying any form of emotional expression around fear or sadness, it wasn't something that we had time for, space for. And so it was easy to develop something known as a secondary emotion, which usually took the form of anger, because anger is very much it's an active doing energy. It carries momentum, right? Anger is a way that we can control our situation and control our fears and control that sense of I don't feel safe. And so that was that played a big role for me. I mean, I witnessed that in my father, just angry every day. Just so aggressive, so volatile. As a child, I very much shone away from that. But as a teenager, I was tired of the people pleasing. I was tired of the retracted fear-based state, and I went the other way. And then I became hyper aggressive, and I was in rage and anger all the time. And so whenever I felt sadness or jealousy or disappointment or frustration or anything that was outside of anger, I would immediately layer it and replace it with anger. Then I started doing that in my teenage years and really pushed people away. I was bullied a lot, but I became a bully. And so my story is not uncommon, though. Males, a lot of men experience this, and so they have this almost this aptitude and this conditioning to anger. And whatever we practice a lot of, we generally become pretty efficient at. And so most men are really good at being angry, but that's not necessarily the real emotion that they're feeling, or the primary emotion. There's nothing wrong with feeling anger, but when we do, we either don't have a healthy outlet to express it, such as exercise, training, primal screaming, processing our own internal emotions, whether it could be release writing or talking with another man or a group or whatever, however it's processed, or it's a secondary emotion. It's not really anger that we need to feel. And so we develop this aptitude for running anger through our bodies, which is stress hormone as well, essentially. High levels of stress hormones. Our nervous system is in fight, flight, or freeze, sympathetic activation. And we're living this life, and we die young. We feel that we die alone. Suicide rates in men is very high. And this isn't to paint a picture of a pity party for men in any capacity. It's just some of the issues that we face that are unspoken, because it's not common for men's issues to be spoken about. More so lately, the last few years, sure. But even then, the resources that we have in our communities for men's resources is very limited and very low.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you talk about the secondary emotion of anger. When the initial emotion of I'm afraid, or I'm sad, or I'm lonely, or I need something, or I'm hurt, when that's suppressed, then the distortion of that becomes anger. And I find that it either turns into mouse energy of, okay, I have to play small, I have to hide, it's too scary, so I'm going to go hide behind the couch, and I'm going to be, this kind of more overcompensating coward of like, it's not safe, so let me just shut down. Or when the testosterone kicks in, like you mentioned, in more the teenage years, then here it becomes more outwardly expressed in anger or rage. And then I think that there's another place where it can express when the emotion when there isn't a safe and sacred space for the emotions to be held without judgment or criticism or oppression. Is that here comes the sedation of it. So I find that in my clients, and what I witness in young men, is that's where addictions start coming in pretty quickly to pot, alcohol, pornography, sexuality, is as an outlet to numb or express those emotions that are not, where a young man is not feeling safe to be himself. And so here comes a sedating pattern. And so do you find that in the men that you work with, or in your personal experience, that there's sedating happening at that time as well?
Yeah, so there's sedation and avoidance patterns that are taking place, and it's not just because of the secondary emotion being a primary mask for feeling at great at great depth is definitely a part that's played. The other piece of that is also self-image. And so as we're going through our teenage years, and our hormonal profiling is changing and shifting rapidly as well. So a few things that are happening. If we don't have a healthy connection to a father figure, if we don't have a healthy connection to other males, what we tend to do is want to prove ourselves and seek that father approval, that masculine approval. And we'll do that in very extreme ways by moving into high-risk behavior. And testosterone is associated with this, but it's also beyond that. There's a psychological development around approval. And if I really am extreme in my behavior, whether that's stealing, whether that's doing drugs, whether that's being a womanizer, whatever it may be, right, oppressing others, but showing this power, exerting power over my environment and whoever's in it, that may impress my father to some degree. The other part of that is men and males really identify their worth and their value in their utility. Again, there's evolutionary, I don't want to say evolutionary theory, but there's evolutionary ties to this and how we're impacted in modern culture. We layer that with the complexity of modern culture and it becomes quite intense, right? But we define ourselves by status and titles and material possession and our utility, the value that we carry in our tribal community. Females more will gain their self-worth through beauty and aesthetics, and men more in that status. That's not definitive by any means. That's a generalization. That happens a great deal. And so men are always wanting to prove themselves. We live in a very masculine dominated society. It's evident in business. It's evident in the way countries interact with each other. Sports, absolutely. It's evident into what we popularize as mainstream acceptable behavior. So we live in a very masculine dominated society. There's nothing wrong with masculinity, but if there's too much of that, we tend to feel imbalanced, right? So men are going to these extremes to prove themselves and connect to their self-worth. And because during that transition period, they're missing essential rites of passage that have been occurring for thousands of years that now it doesn't exist, really. It exists, but it's in mediocre ways, such as, oh, you're 21, you can drink, or you have your driver's license, or now you finish high school. And they're meaningful, but they're not life-changing and expansive, and they're not really teaching us a great deal. It's just saying, oh, I qualify for the next level of my life because I've turned a certain age, but I haven't actually transitioned through anything. I haven't gone through the severance phase, and the reverence phase, but the severance phase of I'm leaving the old behind and I'm transitioning into the new. There's no deliberate nature around that. So this need to prove ourselves. I mean, I went through this. I still go through this. Let's be real. I mean, I still look at myself and say, oh, I could be doing better here. And then when I really look at my life and ask, okay, why am I saying that? Almost always, not always, but almost always, there's a part of me that's being driven by, I need to do more, to prove more, to be of greater value so that I feel better about myself. So there's a codependency there. There's not an interdependency. There's a codependency. There's a reliance on me thinking about, well, if this person thinks this way of me, then I'm going to feel better about myself. And these days it's very subtle and it's in the minutiae of how I operate, but it's still there. I don't know if it will ever go away. I'm sure it will, but and if we really get real with ourselves, there's an element of, I really feel that's within all of us. We're seeking that approval from people that we perceive to value or be of importance to us, that are going to elevate our lives in some capacity, right? And so that's a big thing for men as well, but to a fault, where that man then becomes hyper obsessed with that. So I'm going to climb the corporate ladder and I don't care who I hurt. I don't care what other values I leave behind, family, friends, love. I'm going to cheat, I'm going to lie, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And they may not be having that direct conversation. However, that's the feeling that's coming through. And then when they don't get it, do we get angry? Do we beat ourselves up? Do we not acknowledge ourselves? We do. And you mentioned something really important earlier about non-judgment, about the feminine meeting the masculine with non-judgment and compassion. And without ridicule and humiliation, without that rejection, but that embracing of I see you for who you are. And that's not an easy thing to do, because there's collective feminine wounding, there's individual feminine wounding. What I'm seeing is more and more women stepping into that, saying, I see you, brother, I see you, I love you, I see you for who you are, all of you, even those things that you don't like about yourself. And I'm going to meet you with non-judgment. And that's a very simultaneously healing thing. We can't hold that. We're not ready for that. As a masculine collective, we're not ready for it. It's too overwhelming to be met by the feminine in that way. And that's why it's important that men are doing men's work to prepare themselves for that level of meeting, because most men cannot look a woman in the eyes when a woman is saying, I see you. I see your infidelity. I see your violence. I see your pain. I see the trauma you've experienced. Let's make no mistake. This isn't an accurate, this is an anecdotal assessment, okay? But every time I've run any form of men's work, whether it's with 10 men, 100 men, whatever it may be, minimum 7 out of 10 men, minimum, and let me be even a little nice, say 6 out of 10 men have experienced some form of sexual abuse. Minimum.
Yeah.
Minimum.
I'd say that's the same number for women.
It's higher.
Or higher.
It's higher. It's higher. Yeah. And so we are carrying a lot of repressed trauma. Yeah. And the propensity for males to express is far less than women to express in our cultural conditioning. So there's a lot that we've got to work through as men, and we have to take responsibility for that. We can't let those stories run us. We have to take responsibility for that. This isn't about segregation. This is about actually unification. It's doing the work as individuals to come together as a collective.
It's a journey. I appreciate. I want to back up a little bit. Thank you for that, because it's putting so much. There's a lot to unpack here. It's helping me make more sense of things. I appreciate that you say men are really concerned with their utilitarian value. And if, as women and other men, if we understand that, hey, I need to be valued, and that is a driving force, consciously or unconsciously. And if we have healthy ways of supporting a man feeling valued, then there doesn't have to be the distorted and unhealthy ways. And, seeing that hyper masculine or toxic masculine overcompensate, the more insecurity there is, the more overcompensating may be occurring. And we see that happening all over the place. And within women too, becoming too hyper masculine to compensate for not feeling safe. Women are having these traumas too, where we all seem to be, many seem to be leaning over into the hyper masculine in unhealthy ways from a place of, I don't feel safe, I don't feel seen, I don't feel loved, and so let me overcompensate in some way. And I appreciate that you've brought to the table for us here to look at that, especially because men at a young age have this oppression around the feelings, and talking about, and that number, I'm grateful to hear that number, so it helps me with perspective around those that have experienced sexual trauma, which means a lot of that sexual trauma was happening, of course, non-consensual, and likely by another male. And so for those straight men, there can be a lot of shame around that. There can be a lot of hiding and guilt and confusion. And if there isn't a safe place to talk about that, or if there was an effort to express it and then it was shut down or shamed, then we've got a secondary wounding on top of that says, it's not okay for me to express, I'm not safe, it's my fault. And there's to be able to get with that level of sexual trauma for a man, there's a lot of layering and wounding. And I work with women and around healing core womb traumas, for women. And there's more support, I think, for women to talk about those issues. There's less oppression around, not that it's always safe, and women are still working out their courage to express those wounds in safe ways and reclaim their body. And I can imagine that it's a lot, it's very difficult for men because of the stigmas and because of the social programming around not being safe to talk about things or your feelings. And don't feel, don't cry, and don't talk about it seems to be, deeply woven into the psyche. And also social shaming if you do talk about it. So then that's, if you do express, then you're weak or a wuss. And so women aren't typically secondary shamed in that way. So I thank you for saying that when a woman does her work and comes forward doing her best to hold space, and we're going to talk about how women can do better there, and how you can coach us as women, whether we're supporting this space for a partner or a father or a brother or a son or a colleague or a client, how we can do that in a way that isn't threatening or making it worse. So you mentioned this, that men may not be ready for that level of a woman showing up. So, what advice do you have for men that are going through this so that they get the support they need in places that they can feel safe in a non-judgmental space? Let's start there, and then we'll move to how women can help, the process.
So I want to back up for a moment and I want to elaborate on the utility piece, because for men particularly, it's important that not always that they know the why, but they understand. That we understand as human beings, we're very cognitive, we're very prefrontal cortex loaded, and sometimes it can help us. The utility piece comes from, and this links into the isolation piece. The utility piece comes from being in a tribe, being in a band of men, and basically one's self-worth and value being defined by the contribution to that group, whether it was making a bow and arrow, whether it was hunting, extending the perimeter, whatever it was. Now, men are so isolated in the Western world that we don't have those close, intimate life, bloodline friendships like we do in the military, of course. I mean, that's another completely other conversation, in sports as well. And that's why so many athletes, when they retire, and military men, when they retire, are very psychologically damaged. It's I almost want to say less from PTSD, particularly sports stars. When you're looking at athletes, they don't really experience PTSD as such per se, unless they have traumatic injuries. But it's more because that bonding is lost and their utility now is lost. And so what we're doing is, as men, we're attempting to project that utility. I'm going to project that in the relationship, in my family dynamic. And we put an overemphasis on that. And so we overcompensate. And so we become extreme in that expression. And you layer that with not being valued as a kid, not being seen by your father, not being nurtured by your mother potentially, which is so many children that come from damage and childhood trauma and wounding. You layer that on top of it. It's this desperate fear-based energy. Then layer secondary emotion of anger. And the man is completely confused. And so when we're talking about, your question before, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is how can women show up to, maybe ask the question again, actually, just to make sure.
Well, I want to start first with what are the steps men can take, the support they need, and then we'll look at how women can support that process. That, how does a man, that wants to be more vulnerable, that wants to be, start his healing journey and find more wholeness. How does a man go through that process? I really appreciate your acknowledgement of the brotherhood, because I think that is essential. A healthy brotherhood. We might have attracted surrogate brotherhood in youth or in sports teams that wasn't necessarily healthy. And so this is, finding the brotherhood and the tribe, the modern tribe, where you're getting tools, support, it's safe, you're seen, it's okay to be vulnerable, and that also there's role models that are healthy, and also providing, insights about how it is to, what are the qualities of being, in the sacred masculine.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that there's just not a lot of men walking that. And so, in the absence of an embodied father, which, most men don't have, their father might have been present, but not really awake.
Emotionally available, yeah.
Right. Or, the opposite, emotionally hurtful or completely not present. And so in that space, I feel like, how does a man find what those qualities are? So what are the steps that a man can take for that?
So identifying healthy qualities in a man, it can be a very subjective process. And that's really asking the question is, what does it mean to be a good man? Another question that we probably need to ask before we ask what does it mean to be a good man is, what does it mean to be good at being a man? And that can be a really powerful question to ask. And when we get into that, we start unpacking, okay, what does masculinity or being a healthy man actually look like? And there's different ways to break that up. There's an author, Jack Donovan. He has something called 4 tactical virtues. I sort of take that. I love that notion, and I've added a 5th tactical virtue to that. And really, these are the foundations for being an effective man in the world. And strength, courage, mastery, honor, and connectivity. And honor ties them all up. So if you're doing your role really well in that brotherhood, and this is going to get to answering your question in a moment, then you're carrying honor. Mastery is our ability to use our hands and create in the world, because we can't give birth as men. And so our level of creation comes in, what are we creating in the world? It's very important for us. Yeah. So mastery is part of that. Courage, physical and mental fortitude, strength, carrying strength in our physical bodies, having confidence in our bodies. It doesn't mean that you have to, run 100 meters in under 10 seconds or be the world's strongest man. It just means having aptitude and confidence in your body. And from a biological perspective and from the perspective of attraction dynamics and polarity dynamics, it's very important to the feminine that the man feels confident in his body. It's actually a very attractive thing. The connectivity piece comes in the connection that we have because we're relational beings. So we start to get a hold of these. We start to take responsibility for our sense of being a man in the world. Now, ultimately, we have to say to ourselves, you know what? I'm looking at my life and there's some patterns here. And these patterns that I'm experiencing, they're not really healthy for me. I keep making the same choices over and over again, different face, different name, different time. I'm the common denominator. So that level of initial responsibility is really important for men. Doing it alone and being a lone wolf, that's not really going to work. Now, that doesn't negate oneself from being self-reliant. That doesn't mean you can't be your own first port of call, have that trust and connection to yourself. But before you get there, there's going to be a lot of shit that gets delayered from self. A lot of the masks need to come off. And one of the best ways the masks come off are through other men, being witnessed by other men, being called forward and challenged healthily by other men. Challenge is the domain of the masculine. We thrive in that. We develop a deeper sense of self. We overcome a difficulty and a challenge, and we get to know an aspect of self, particularly if we're deliberate with that. So being surrounded by other men, seeking men's groups, seeking a counselor, a shaman, a spiritual healer, a therapist, reading, being involved in physical activity can really help bring out a part of us that's been dormant for so long. You see, in today's world, we've replaced physical prowess with dominion over economic strength. Nothing wrong with that. It's fantastic to carry wealth and prestige and power and status. But let's be real, the majority of people that are pursuing that, majority of people that are in that, A, are never happy, they're never satisfied. Whether they're a man or a woman, they're living in a masculine, a hyper-masculine energetic. And B, they're doing it because they still want daddy's approval.
Yeah.
It's pretty much that simple. It's really not that complicated. And so we just don't want to look at that because that requires us doing work. So fundamentally, we've got to do our own work. We've got to do our own inner work. Talking about showing up, how do men show up for themselves and other men and for the women in their lives and their communities, and how do women show up for men? There's a very simple answer to that. It's simple to understand, but it's more difficult to execute. And it's a human answer. It's not a woman or man thing. You've got to do your own work. Simple as that. You can't show up for someone else if you're going to be consistently triggered. If you're going to take it personally when they express their pain, you're going to say, oh, is it my fault? That's you not having healed your people pleaser wounding, or that's you not having healed your rejected little boy, or that's you not having healed your insecurity of when you were bullied. if you don't heal these aspects of self, you don't do your own inner work, you can't show up and hold space for someone else, because you're constantly going to be thinking about, oh, what have I done wrong? Oh, they're attacking me, I'm going to defend myself. And then all of a sudden, instead of it being a meaningful exchange of someone expressing themselves to you and just wanting to be seen and witnessed and heard, you can't do that because you're stuck in your own pain. So we've got to do our own inner work. I mean, I still get like that. Sometimes my wife, Christine, will come to me and she'll have an issue, and for some reason I'll think, oh, it must be me. And then I get to, instead of holding space for her and just listening and asking her meaningful questions and being empathetic and compassionate, I'm taking it personally and I'm making it about me. Yeah. Now that's selfish, and that's me coming from that little boy wounding. Now I don't have to judge myself for that or be harsh to myself, but I have to acknowledge it in order to shift and move on. And if I don't, I'm going to be stuck in that loop and that cycle. Another misconception is, we talk about the sacred masculine, divine masculine, the healthy masculine. Look, I think before Jesus got on that cross, whether you're religious or not, it's irrelevant. It's a story, right? Before he got on that cross and was crucified, I bet you he was crucified 1,000,001 times. Let me tell you what I mean by that. There's no fucking way he got up on that cross, not having lived either many lives before or that life, without having given up 1,000 times, without having been crucified by himself, by his own ego, by those around him, by not being questioned. He would have been questioned. He would have been challenged. He would have said, you know what, God, fuck this, I'm done. I'm not, this Messiah thing, it's not for me. I'm sure he would have done that multiple times. And so, is he not the sacred masculine? Yeah, he is. He's a shade of the sacred masculine. Absolutely. So we have to also get out of this notion of this divine feminine, sacred masculine. Something that's really been on my heart a lot is because, people consider me this, healthy, and I am in my healthy masculine. Absolutely. I know that because I've had the contrast. I know what it's like being a very unhealthy masculine. And I'm also not perfect. I'm working through stuff. I always do. I always make that clear. I say, hey, I've got my shadows. I know what my shadows are. I walk with them. I walk in them. I don't run from them. Sometimes I do, short period of time, but sometimes I run from them. But, that's part of that journey. Being in our sacred masculine is owning our stuff and saying, I'm sorry.
I think that's one of the most valuable qualities, from what I understand, around the divine masculine is humility, in men or women.
Yeah.
And accountability and integrity that are willing to be, and honesty, like willing, hey, I messed up, or I don't know how to do this, or I tried and I failed, but I'm going to try again, or it's okay for me to ask for advice here. That doesn't mean we don't mess up. I mean, like what you said about the masculine is that he, in man or woman, is the one that is going outside of the perimeter of the known in uncharted territory to face the dragons in life for the tribe. It's the part of us that has to, be courageous and face fears and face the unknown. And of course, we're not going to be perfect in that, because we've never been in that. That aspect of self is the one that explores new territory, and who's masterful in the new territory. That means there's got to be willingness to be seen and to be vulnerable and struggle and fail and get back up again, where the toxic masculine in men or women is like, hey, not my fault, or I didn't make that mistake, or so afraid to fail, or if the failing's happening, it's like, oh, I have to be ashamed of it. And that doesn't allow us to learn or grow. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the healthy masculine is that, level of humility. I appreciate that in this conversation, we're looking at this tenderness and the willingness to keep doing our work. What I've heard you say is, hey, brothers, and women too, we've got to be doing our inner work first. And then I feel that there's another piece that you're sharing about learning new communications tools that none of us were really raised with, about how to name our feelings, how to listen to a partner, how to listen without taking things personally, how to express our needs without anger or blame. And these are skills that none of us really were raised with typically. And so it feels like a couple parts here of, doing your own work which is a journey and a process, whether you're in relationship or out of relationship. That's going to be an ongoing journey forever, I feel. Is to keep peeling back the layers and the wounds and looking at the triggers and being in the classroom of life. And then also the willingness to have the courage to learn a new skill and to practice conscious communication, especially in those environments where we tend to get triggered. And I think in my relationship with my father was one of those first testing grounds of learning more conscious communication, because with him that is absolutely not what I learned growing up. It was very volatile, very aggressive, very oppressive. And I had to learn a different communication style if I ever was going to be friendly and kind with my father, because all we knew how to do was this. And I learned by the master how to be a verbal warrior.
Yeah.
I learned how to throw daggers that were lethal because I was trained by the master, and I knew how to do that when I felt I was backed into the corner or threatened. Then here comes my toxic masculine that was overcompensating and protecting a wound, but also I didn't have another tool. I wasn't taught that there is something in between hiding behind the couch and throwing a lethal verbal dagger in someone's heart with the intention of drawing blood and causing pain. I didn't know, Stefanos, that there was a path in between where I can still be courageous without being a coward, and I can still communicate without hurting. And that has been a journey that I'm still on, learning how to navigate that territory, especially when it's precarious with somebody that has been maybe your aggressor or somebody that tends to trigger you a lot, whether that's a boss or a family member or an ex or a sibling. I find that those tend to be the people in my life that bring about my unconscious communication patterns the most, giving me the opportunity, if I'm doing my work, to look at my shadow side and see what's up there and see what is being invited to evolve. Because I could go back into, well, it's their fault, or I can go into the humility of after I make a mess, of looking at it an opportunity as a learning environment to, what is this trying to show me? So, how do you navigate that, and what has been that journey from not having the tools and it being super messy? What does it look like when you start doing your core healing and practicing more conscious communication? What are you finding changes when you start doing that work?
Well, firstly, it's very messy at the beginning for most people. I think for most people, let's get that very clear. I think for most people, it's super messy. It's ugly is an understatement. I think what begins to happen is we open up parts of ourselves that have been dormant for a very long time and asleep. And those are the parts that people want to connect with the most, especially with men, because men have this reputation as a gender to be shut down emotionally. Women want to connect with. See, women say, I want to make my man more feminine. I want my man to tap into his feminine side more. I don't believe that's necessarily true. What I believe is we want to resonate with each other, and we resonate on a level of familiarity. And so, of course, it's important that men are able to communicate and express emotions at a deeper level than what the greater collective generally does. What happens is we start accessing these parts of us, we become more trustworthy. But we don't think of that. We think vulnerability is weakness. But when you look at Brené Brown's definition of vulnerability, I look at and I've done a lot of work with elite special forces soldiers, elite athletes, Olympians, gold medalists, world champion fighters. They require a level of vulnerability every day to show up to the challenges that they show up to. And they're some of the toughest men in the world. Yeah. So they engage in a lot of deep vulnerability. Vulnerability is strength. And so it's how it's expressed in men that's really important. So when we're looking at that, we're accessing parts of ourselves that have been asleep and dormant, and we're giving that to the people in our lives in an intimate way. People then trust us because we're more open to them. Now, when they trust us, they then give themselves and open their hearts to us and open their bodies and their minds to us, which is what we want as men. Men want two things. There's a lot of studies have been done on this, right? And fundamentally, men want two things. One of them is apophatically and one of them is direct. Is they want more sex. This is what the studies show, right? More sex and less conflict. But let's just break that down a little bit, right? More sex doesn't necessarily mean more physical sex. It's a gateway for us to deeper intimacy, to being witnessed and seen and held for who we are and accepted with no judgment. Because when we're having more sex, by default in our mind, well, if we're having more sex, we're more than likely satisfying that person, utility. We're not being rejected. We're not being humiliated. We're satisfying them, meaning that we're doing a good job. We're in that completion energetic of masculine, right? Because we want to complete, we want to achieve, we want to go on. So we're ticking all these boxes that have very little to actually do with sex. But because sex can be so powerful, it's an intense physical and emotional, physical experience for most people. And of course, it's definitely a emotional, spiritual, relational, everything experience when we harness it, right? And accordingly, that's what men really want. And the conflict piece is we do want peace. We do want connection in that way. We don't want to be judged and critiqued. And so when we start doing this inner work, we start bonding at a deeper level with the people in our lives that matter to us. They get to see us.
Well, and with that, if there is more communication and healthy communication, then it doesn't sound like drama and nitpicking, from the woman. And I think that when there isn't communication and there isn't cooperation, then, here comes a woman trying to get that out and trying to use drama or repetition or complaining or blaming to try to wake up, shake up a man to communicate, to be present. So, and I've fallen in that trap for sure of like, okay, you're not emotionally available. You're not here. You're not energetically present. And so then I'm going to come, the overcompensating tactic is either, well, one, let's ignore that there's a problem and not talk it. And then here comes, the dark devil of dragon of resentment that begins to build within each, and in passive aggressive or outward expressively ways creates destruction. Or there's this kind of nitpicky kind of like, where a wife's, complaining all the time. You don't show up, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And, then just, a man tends to just, contract even more. And so what advice do you have for women when their partner or their son or their father is in that more contracted space? How can we show up in a way that doesn't make it worse?
Yeah, so that's a beautiful question, and a very, for me, when I hear someone ask that question, I feel very humbled and very grateful, because I know where I came from with respect to how I treated myself and how I treated women and certain women and so forth, and it's a very humbling question to be able to receive that. And from a personal perspective, it's also, I look at myself and I go, oh, wow, it's okay. I've got a long ways to go, so to speak, but I really have come a long way to be able to even hear that question and be asked that question. And so thank you for that. And most men feel so much shame. I mean, we haven't really spoken about shame. Shame is a killer. Shame is paralyzing. And sometimes when a woman asks that question, hey, how can I help you? How can I serve you? How can I best serve you? How can I be present to you? It actually brings up a lot of shame for men. And for me personally, it did for a very, very long time. I thought, well, I'm not worthy enough to receive that. I live in the shadows. You don't even know what I do. You don't want to be nice to me. You don't want to be kind. You don't want that. And I'm unworthy. And so there's a push there. And then again, the push is division. And there's a sense of that person that's asking that question feels deflated and feels very lost as well and feels helpless. Maybe their stuff comes up, and it depends obviously on the situation there. But You know, one of the greatest gifts that I have found that both the feminine and females can give men and the masculine is non-judgment and compassion. Just not holding us, literally saying to us, you are not your past. Your past is in the past. I don't want to relive that to bring it into the present. If you relive that, that's your choice, but I'm not going to choose that. I'm going to choose to see who I see in front of me now. I'm going to see beyond the veil of illusion. I'm going to see beyond the shadow. I'm going to see into your potential, and I'm going to hold you to that. And whilst I hold you to that, I'm also going to set healthy boundaries around how you treat me and how I allow anyone to treat me. And that level of feminine discernment and power, like I said, that's very fucking overwhelming for most men. For most people, that's a lot of power there. And, you know, I couldn't hold that. I couldn't hold that for a long, long time. I had to do a lot of work on myself, a lot of clearing, a lot of deep, deep psychological, emotional work, well beyond I'm a big fan of plant medicine. I'm a big fan of the sacrament that is derived from earth, that we are able to gain accelerated insight into the expansion of our consciousness. And I'm also not a fan of that unraveling without us as humans doing deep work, shadow work in the familiar. This is the familiar. This state of consciousness is the familiar. And doing a substantial amount of work here before moving into the expansion and the acceleration of something like a 5-MeO DMT or ayahuasca or whatever it may be, right? Because how our ancestors used to use sacred medicines and sacraments like that was very different to how it's used today. The environment was different. The amount of neurotoxins in the world and poisons in our waterways, and so that didn't exist. We were living in a cleaner physiological world. We're polluted now in various ways. And so, again, I say that because it's important that men clear up not only their psychological, emotional health, but also their physical health to the best they can, so that they can receive that level of wisdom from the feminine, that compassion and non-judgment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to dive into this piece because this is very delicate and a very fine line. When you said, "Hey, you're not your past, and I want to show up with unconditional love with where you are right now," and I appreciate that you added with discernment around self-respect, because there can be a line of self-abandonment with a woman, or a partner, man, woman, whatever the sexual orientation, where there is such an honoring of where somebody is that provides with unconditional love of, oh, it's okay, I understand, I forgive. And then it's like, here comes another infidelity, or here comes another abuse, or here comes another emotional bullying. And I know I've danced way past this line before, where my desire to love and support another has created also a distortion with myself of self-abandonment. And that isn't love either. And I also have been in that place of not knowing, thinking, oh, I just need to keep loving and forgiving and honoring and walk on eggshells in this way, that I've also enabled an unhealthy pattern within a partner to continue. And so how does a man or woman navigate that when they're dealing with a dynamic where you want to be compassionate and you want to be supportive without bringing your judgment, and at the same time advocate for self in a way that isn't manipulating or creating a power? Well, if you're not going to change, I'm out of here, but also offers, hey, in my compassionate support, I also don't want to throw myself under the bus. And what do you see that often? And what advice do you have with people that are navigating a situation like that, to know how to do that in such a way that honors the other without abandoning self?
Yeah, I do see that
very tricky myself.
And it is tricky. And so when it's really tricky, it's telling you something. It's telling you that you have to probably go a little more within, spend a little more time in solitude. Don't be in an intimate relationship. Be single. work on yourself, continue to prioritize that as a high value in your life, and just keep doing that deeper inner work. That's really the reflection piece that I would have on that. And I've seen that time and time again where people jump into a relationship. I've done it. I'm sure most of us have done it, really. We need that solo time.
What is, I think that times for chunks of celibacy are essential just for individuating and understanding who we are and why we're in relationship, because man or woman can overcompensate with loving another so much and building the bridge all the way to the other when the other person isn't capable, available, or wanting to build any part of the bridge back, and are doing it from an overcompensating place of not feeling worthy of love, so that they have to give more of love. And I, just had this with a client recently where he's doing all the loving and woman's not present at all. And women do that too, where they're doing all the loving and the man's not really showing up. And how to really acknowledge what's the motivation behind that. What's the motivation?
We need others to mirror and reflect to us how we're behaving and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because we often can't see the forest through the trees, and so we really require others to say, "Hey," and call us forward. Whether it's a therapist, a shaman, a spiritual healer, a group that we attend, a sister circle, a brotherhood, whatever it may be. Say, "Hey, you're behaving in really codependent ways here. You're sacrificing yourself. You're losing and contorting yourself in this relationship. You're giving a hell of a lot. And I think you're being taken advantage of." And this is what Christine would say, my wife, is an issue-based relationship where you're coming together to sort of heal each other through these deep, deep issues, but you're not doing anything about it. You're just allowing the wounding to play out. And that's not healthy and that's not safe. And so we need then to develop, part of the healing is for us developing the courage in using our voice, our heart and our bodies and our throat, and opening that up and say, "Hey, this is not going to serve me anymore." And not for it to be lip service, but to actually do it. And sometimes we have to separate from that individual, that set of circumstances, because it's not healthy for us.
Yeah, see, this is, I find that, where somebody gets tripped on this a lot is, I have so much love for them. If I pull back, I have to navigate my own shame around abandoning them. And that whole rescuer dynamic of, well, I'm here to love them and I'm here to, save them. And so that piece can get really codependent and really tricky. And that feeling of, but I'm responsible for their safety. And if I back up, then they might go in a depression spiral, or they might hate me. And so there's a lot of times this really unhealthy distortion around
codependency.
Yeah.
And usually that's that level of behavior and patterns enacted in romantic partnerships as adults is something usually developed created, cultivated during our developmental years, from the ages of 0 to 9, and the way that we attach to our primary caregivers, the way that we give and receive love, the way we learn about ourselves, and the way we end up valuing ourselves in terms of our self-worth. And often when we're in that situation, our self-worth is so low that we're relying on others to tell us how good we are or how amazing we are, or them just being able to receive, "Oh, I really appreciate that." And we get this boost until the next time. And then we have to keep contorting ourselves and sacrificing our values and not really living our truth. And we cultivate resentment. We get very tired. We develop chronic illnesses. Our inner child is screaming to be heard. They're not getting the attention that they need. It's a really, really unhealthy space to be in.
This is, most relationships are working in some form of this dynamic in unhealthy codependency. This is where many find themselves not being able to step away from an unhealthy dynamic because they're afraid to be alone, or they don't know how to be outside of this chaotic dynamic because their value and self-worth is so woven into the identity of the relationship that when they try to step back, all they do is I just want to be with you, because they don't know how to be with self. And I think that's why we have like the serial monogamy that doesn't doesn't give space to individuate after a breakup, or know how to do that and the necessity of doing that. It's like, well, then I have to have another man, or I have to have another woman right away, or because I can't be alone, I can't be with self. And this goes back to doing the inner work, like from the very beginning of just doing that inner work and questioning what is bringing us together, what is holding this relationship together. Is it just we're alone, lonely? Is it just sex? Is it you feed my ego? Like what, like really asking what is the nature of the dynamic that is holding this relationship together, and is it valid? Is it really coming from an unconscious codependency, or is it coming from a place of authenticity and truth?
I think if most people get very real with themselves, most of their relationships are coming from a place of childhood wounding.
Yeah.
Our primary caregiver relationships, we develop a deeper sense of self during that period of time, and our romantic partnerships as adults, they're really extensions of that. And until we get clear on our own wounding, and until we get clear on being very willing as a characteristic, or as an application of something, of virtue that's expressed in relationship, and so I'm going to be willing to work on this, I'm going to be willing to be triggered, I'm going to be willing to get uncomfortable, I'm going to be willing to make changes, I'm going to be willing to really see myself in a way I never have before and support you no matter how painful it is. Or, well, I mean, there's obviously there's a spectrum there, right? Like if it's unhealthily painful, then no. If it's toxic, then no. That's not healthy. But really willing to do the work together as a couple, there's something to be said for that, and not just in terms of I'm going to speak to this, but I'm actually going to do it and show up when the going gets tough.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for that in a relationship, irrespective of what your container looks like, whether it's sexually or socially monogamous, whether it's an expression of non-monogamy or polyamory. That isn't really relevant. Most people in whatever relationship they're in don't really want to be in that relationship style or structure anyway, because we don't give enough thought to the important things in life. Like it's really that simple. Like, think about it. Here's an example that sums that up. The attention span on social media is like 1 point something seconds. Case in fucking point, I don't even need to say anymore. But that's where we're at as a humanity. Like, if you're not capturing people's attention in literally under 2 or 3 seconds, they're scrolling. That's where we are. So what makes you think people are going to think about monogamy or non-monogamy? Most people don't even know what that means. So and again, this isn't I'm not having a dig at humanity. I'm just, whenever I'm calling anyone or anything or any aspect of humanity forward, I'm just calling as a part of myself forward to say, hey, maybe I need to think about things a little differently as well.
Well, you know what? You just said something interesting, because like, hey, doing the work in relationship, doing the work, like willing for it to be messy, willing to show up for your own healing, and willing to work it out with another partner. That takes a certain level of commitment to be uncomfortable, messy. There may be emotions, there may be, it might be uncomfortable. And you said earlier that a man wants sex, and he wants things to be simple, or not complicated, and yet at the same time, here's this contradiction of, hey, doing the inner work in a conscious relationship isn't always easy. It's not, hey, it's a lot easier to just go get sex somewhere else than it is to like show up and do the work, for men and women.
Yep.
This is where it's like, oh, this is so painful, this is so difficult to do the real work with my partner, because I have to look at my stuff, I have to talk about it, we have to negotiate it, and then we have to set clear boundaries, and then when the boundaries aren't honored, we have to
sounds like a lot of work, huh?
This is a clear agreement. And yet this flies in the face of what you just said earlier, that men really want it simple and want sex and simplicity. And it's like, how do you navigate that? And this is where I appreciate you said, hey, the commitment to do the work with your partner is really valuable, because there will be times when it's not simple or easy.
Yeah, you're right. There's something there for men that you just said. So it's, you said, and it's a really valid point. Well, if men want simplicity, then doing the work it's not really simple, right? But it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be complex in terms of layered, but it doesn't have to be complicated in terms of, I don't get this, I'm disillusioned. But the way to get men into that space is to show them what's on the other side. And when a woman really steps into her feminine beauty, I'm not just talking about the physical aesthetic beauty. I'm talking about the gifts, the multitude of gifts that she has to offer. Again, whether you're in a non-monogamous relationship, and that's not too relevant right now. But that when a man is able to, and I know I'm speaking to a normative,
Of course.
Heterosexual dynamic here, but this applies to, because masculine and feminine energies exist within all of us. This applies to any type of relationship. But when that individual, we're speaking to men specifically, so when that man is able to receive that feminine energetic and see and witness, wow, this is what I can have access to, it's pretty good motivation. No, it's beyond motivation. It's pretty good inspiration, actually. Motivation is a product of the mind and is short-lived. That inspiration is a burning fire within us that doesn't really require a lot of coaxing.
Mm-hmm. And this is where women, we get to really do our work so that we're in our internal alignment and we're not sourcing a partner for validation or to be rescued or to be seen or to be loved or supported in ways in which we can self-source, so that we can actually come full and open, receive, and allow the juiciness of this the feminine to come forward and bring those gifts into the relationship in ways in which allow a man to be held by her deliciousness and her creativity or playfulness and passion and that vulnerability and where she can really be in that nurturing place, which I think what you said earlier about when a boy has that disconnection from his mom, is seeking that from women, but not in a maternal way, in an equitable way that isn't, hey, I want to replace my mother, because then we have this unhealthy dynamic of mother-son, which isn't healthy in a relationship. Power's power. We want equanimity that allows a woman's gifts to come forward and allows a man to soften, and it allows a man to lead and a woman to soften. And now we're getting into that sacred union of what a relationship can be like when a man and a woman are both in their feminine and masculine in healthy ways. That's, I think, where it gets really delicious and juicy for two beings, men or women, to be able to come into that balance within, so that they're not sourcing it from the other. And now we really get to share and weave from that place.
That's powerful. That's interdependence, not codependence, right? Now we're becoming healthily self-reliant with this ability to also reach out and be relational in a deep and profound way. That's exciting.
That is exciting. And I think that when you said, hey, when you can show to somebody what's on the other side, that this challenge of doing your inner work and learning and practicing and refining the tools of more conscious communication, that what is on the side of that is deeper intimacy, the deeper love that we're all craving anyway, that can happen in that relationship when we're also sourcing self, and it isn't conditional that, hey, you have to stay in this relationship as well, that there isn't the traps of condition and attachment that doesn't allow freedom in the relationship, whether that's, hey, if it's evolving and growing and you need to move on, that I'm not going to cling and control, or whether that's to open the relationship or dissolve the relationship, or just freedom and space within the relationship that may be monogamous, to say, hey, I need more space to go play with my brothers. I need more space to be alone, just to allow that, not from a place of insecurity or control. So what resources do you suggest for men that are just starting with this, or that men are on their journey that need more tools or resources, programs, events, online opportunities and where they can find the brotherhood and resources to support their own journey here.
Yeah, look, there are many men that are doing deep work, such as myself, and serving other men in this capacity. I mean, Sacred Sons and organizations that I'm part of, sacredsons.com, it's a great level of connection and communication. I've got other brothers that are doing this deep work as well in the space. You can reach out to me. You can jump on growwithsteph.com. There's information there for men as well. But there's also local men's circles, like the Mankind Project's an organization that's been around for many, many years. They have millions of followers. They're doing amazing things. I don't necessarily agree with everything they do, but I'm not going to fault them. They're awesome. They really are. In many, many ways, they're doing amazing things for men, and helping men reconnect to themselves and who they are in the world and relationships. And look, if, I had a client of mine and a good friend of mine now. He was really struggling for male connection. He was working away a lot in mine sites, and it's called fly in, fly out in Australia. And he said, man, I just feel disconnected from men. There were various reasons for that. And I said, bro, meet up, do it. Go on Facebook, go on meetup.com, start a meetup group, start a Facebook, like say, hey, I'm meeting here, young entrepreneurs, men that are interested in this. Anyway, he had like 40 something men be of interest, and 18 or 19 showed up when he first did it. Yeah. Create your own if you can't join one.
Yeah. That's great advice, Steph.
Sorry?
That's great advice, Steph.
Yeah, join a sports
based
club.
on issues or topics or an age or a geographic location, or it's entrepreneurs or fathers or in your 20s, like you can create it if it does not exist. Build it.
Yeah. I mean, and join a sports club, join a sporting team, get into, and I understand that some sporting teams, and depending on where you are, there's a drinking culture, and that's not necessarily a healthy part of it, but hey, you can moderate yourself. You can have self-expression, you have self-control, like you get to practice all that. But there are many ways. Just don't do it alone, guys. That's the best thing to say. And because we can't project our inner child needs onto our partners. They can't hold that, and nor should they. Your partner's not your therapist. She's not your coach. She's not your mother. She's not your father. That doesn't mean you can't work out stuff together, but when you're coming from that wounded, unattended to little boy, what happens is that usually the woman is going to assume that mother role. That's going to wear thin very quickly. The polarity is going to dissonate and diminish. The magnetism, the sexual magnetism is going to go. Yep. You're going to start resentment, anger, fighting, disagreements. And then all of a sudden, instead of doing the deeper work, you're saying, well, we're not really meant for each other.
Right. And then you just attract the next thing in another relationship, different haircut.
Different haircut. Love that.
I really appreciate that you said, hey, that your healing work needs to happen outside of the relationship. You know, the main support of it doesn't mean that you're not working through things or sharing or communicating, but the main part of your support, your healing, and the, learning new tools has to happen outside of the relationship.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that couples can't go to things together.
Of course not.
But so the two organizations that you mentioned, the first one that I was exposed to was Mankind Project, which you mentioned. And I've got a lot of brothers that over the years that have been in that, and it depends on the chapter and the strength of the chapter and the devotion of the brothers within that and how they hold the caliber of that. But I found that there are some wonderful chapters in that program, and also that that can also be for people that are really just starting and that are really traumatized, PTSD and abuse or dealing with substance abuse, things like that. Can you share a little bit more about Mankind Project? And then I've heard and seen great things about Sacred Sons, so I want to hear a little bit more about what that is, so that way anybody listening, they might have a son, a brother, a husband, a partner, a colleague, a client that they may want to refer. So what would you tell us a little bit more about each one of those organizations?
Yeah, so Mankind Project, I mean, you really summed it up quite well. There's chapters all over the world. You'll go through an initiation process. I can't speak too much to that because we're not vowed to secrecy, but it's a private practice. It's a process. If I give away the details of what that looks like, it changes the actual process or the experience for men. but it can be the initiatory process can be very empowering for men, help them connect to other men, to nature, to themselves in a deeper way. That could be very powerful as well. And really, you just
chapters. That's what's nice about that is it's not a whole virtual environment. You actually meet, within an hour of your, depending.
That's right.
So Mankind Project, okay.
Yeah, and Sacred Sons is, Sacred Sons has been around for a couple of years now, 3 years, and it's a relatively new organization. And really, it's very similar to Mankind Project, but in different ways, slightly different ways. We do a lot of shadow work with men. We take men through different forms of rites of passage. And we initiate men, but we're really creating a brotherhood and a sovereignty, but a connection with men, and letting men know that you're not alone. You have a place to deal with your stuff, to really express, to lean in here into your brothers. A lot of friendships are formed there. We do live events. There's virtual brotherhood and meetups and brother circles that are held, and virtually and also in person. There's chapters around that, and that's expanding slowly as well. Mankind Project took many years to expand in the way that it has. Sacred Sons is doing that similar, just in different ways. So there's big things ahead for that as well, as the world opens up in different ways. But there's not just those organizations. There's other ones. There's plenty in LA. There's a few in New York, or New York, upstate New York, and the East Coast, and there's some in Europe. And we're growing. Men's movement is growing. There's plenty in Australia. It's just, you've just got to be motivated to get outside of what's comfortable and outside of the norm. That's all.
What I think is beautiful about the brotherhood circles is that it's reframing safety within, from man to man. Safety is that you're not being criticized, you're safe to emote, and that physical contact, like a hug between another brother, can happen and it's not misinterpreted sexually and all of that, where men are like, oh, I can't hug a brother because then he's going to think it's, I'm attracted to, all of that kind of the homophobia, fear that I've witnessed in these men's organizations, that all of those things start to dissolve, they start to heal, and it's a safe space to be seen, be vulnerable, share from a confidential space, and also reframe that it's safe to be around other men and begin to build brotherhood bonds that become lasting friendships, which I think is so necessary. For 2 decades, I've been doing women's work where we're doing this kind of thing, healing where there has been wounds, sister wounds, where we stealing each other's men and stabbed each other in the back and gossiped behind each other's, back, and healing those old wounds that allow us to stand in our truth and support another sister and have her back and want her to shine and be vulnerable, be seen, and rise together. And this is why, like the women's retreat that I'm doing in September here, is the awakening that sacred feminine, and then the sacred sexuality work that I'm doing within women, which is about kind of that womb healing. And this is about safety within the sisterhood. And I think that you mentioned that it's important for us as men and women, whatever kind of sexual orientation that relationship you're in or seeking, that you find sisterhood and brotherhood within, so that you have that tribe, you have that support, and you're not leaning on your partner to be all of that for you. Like you said, your partner is not your therapist, and you need more than one person. A tribe is not one person.
No, it's many.
It's many. We learn from the diversity of the brotherhood and the sisterhood, where we get to learn from different versions of man, different ages of man, and from a younger man, and from one that has a different cultural background and a different religious history and a different trauma. We get to learn from the diversity of our tribe in this way, and it expands our medicine bag and our toolkit, strengthening the tribe. So, brother, I so appreciate, the work that you're doing, and especially with Sacred Sons, and also just free on Instagram, how many videos you're putting up, which is just valuable, such valuable insights and beautiful pearls that are, you're just so prolific with your medicine. And I appreciate, everything that you're doing to help get these messages out for men and also for women. You do a lot of saying, hey, sisters, here's what you can do differently. And here's how to see the man, here's how to see men, and here's what we're going through. And I just deeply appreciate the medicine that you bring here to this message, and how humble you are to keep being vulnerable about your own process and where you're learning and growing. And that's just beautiful to witness. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Will you share with everybody where people can find you?
Yeah, you can jump on growwithsteph, STEF.com. So growwithsteph.com. There's a heap of freebies there as well, and some assessments you can take, free assessments, and just it's a pathway. You can go to my main website from there, but it's a nice entry point. And of course on social media at Stefanos Sifandos. Yeah.
We will be certain to have those links in the gifts and the show notes, so that we'll make sure that people have that. We'll also add the sacredsons.com and Mankind Project as well, just as links if people are wanting to explore those pathways, because I just think that Sacred Sons looks like they're doing you guys look like you're doing wonderful work. If every man could go through that, I mean, this world would be a different place. And if every woman could do their sacred sexuality healing and do the womb healing work, goddess awakening, there's so many resources for women too, so that we can come together as sisters and brothers, stronger, more whole. So you can find all of those details. I'm going to give a free gift of a guided visualization, which we'll have in the show notes. You can find this sister, shamangelichealing.com. And so the upcoming events that we have: a Soul Awakening Retreat for men and women, that's in September, and then a Goddess Awakening Retreat in late September. And the Sacred Feminine series is on the website. That's coming up in August, and again will be offered. So that's just a whole lot of fun. I'm at Anahata Ananda on all social medias. And I just want to thank you so much, Steph. This has been so valuable. You've been so generous with your time and your wisdom and your heartfelt wisdom around this topic, and so much more. And I'm looking forward to playing, collaborating, and weaving our magic together in the coming months and years, because it would be an honor to weave with you to support men and women through this process. So
thank you, Anahata. I appreciate you very much.
All right, everybody, go check out. Please share this if you felt this was valuable, if this was deep medicine for you in some way. If you think somebody watching or listening would benefit from this, please share it. Give us a rave review on Shamangelic Healing on the podcast, and thank you for tuning in. As always, bless you. Go forth and shine. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.